So, my name's Jacky, and I have the wonderful Elise joining me today as well. How are you, Elise?
Hello, everyone. Good, thank you.
Good to hear. So, Elise is our head of schools in New South Wales. So, no doubt many of you joining us today know her fondly. And I'm currently the head of special projects at Stile, which is a bit of an odd job title, but basically means that I'm often hidden away in the background, cooking up the new ideas to help you deliver the best possible science education to your students. So the last 2 years, I have been down in the bunker working with an amazing team on Stile X, which hopefully you've all heard about. Now, Elise, if you've been doing your job, hopefully everyone's heard about it.
Hopefully.
Been talking to lots of people about Stile X. It is our new resource to help students develop their study, revision, and note-taking skills. Basically, with Stile X, we've used the gradual release of responsibility model, it's tongue twister, as the framework to move students to a point of being able to use these skills independently. So while Stile X is designed as an independent learning resource for students, we would definitely recommend explaining and modelling to students how to use it in class to start with, particularly in those younger years, particularly in year 7. In saying that, there is a high level of support provided throughout the books, so that if you don't have the time or the space to do it in your classroom, they should be able to pick it up independently. But we think modelling and doing that practice with them is so valuable. So let's start with the why. Why is good note-taking important? First of all, it does encourage that deep learning of the content. Now, I know we had someone in the chat there before, who was it? Katrina, excellent, highlighted deep learning as an important skill that students need for that success in senior science. The other reason note-taking is important is because it does give them that hard copy reference and summary of that key information. And the research does support that there is also some really great benefits, and that students that take notes do actually perform better on those exams or those tests. So we have 3 different types of note-taking that we introduce in Stile X as students progress from years 7 to 10. So we have the outline, the 2-column, and the Cornell notes. So we do start off with the easiest and most simple, and then gradually build the skills that students need to progress to the more complex Cornell notes. I just want to point out, in the revision notes section of Stile X, it's not as though students are just taking notes in every single lesson. So there are a whole range of different activities and that encourage them to use different strategies that they might use to take good notes. So things like flowcharts and Venn diagrams, but at least one lesson in every booklet, so in every unit of work, gets students to explicitly practice that note-taking method that is in their particular year level. So in this way, they're regularly practicing and having that repeated exposure throughout.
So in year 7, we actually start, as Jacky said, with the outline note-taking method, which you can see in front of you there. So this is one of the most common and natural note-taking methods. So it makes sense to start off with this. It basically involves creating an outline, hence the name. So it lets you organize your notes in a structured form, helping students save a lot of time for reviewing them at a later date. The outline note-taking method uses bullet points to represent different topics and their subtopics. So it gives a lots of structure to student notes and helps them to identify those key topics. And it's a really great note-taking method for when information is presented in a logical way. So, which I'm sure all of your year 7 classes are, most definitely. So in year 8, we are now introducing the 2-column note-taking method, which is a page of 2-column notes. And as you can see, it consists of that vertical line down the page with a horizontal line at the top. So it's just shown here. The vertical line is drawn about 1/3 of the way from the left-hand side of the paper. And that's where the main ideas are written. So those main ideas are written on the left, and then they're supported by other information and associated key details, which are written on the right-hand side. So the supporting information and details on the right are for students to unpack the main ideas that they've identified on the left. The top also is an area for a heading or a topic that they can list. As you'll notice, It's inspired by Cornell note-taking, and it is going to help with that natural progression for students working up into years 9 and 10. So the 2-column note-taking method really encourages students to separate the main ideas from the detail. I'm not sure about you, but my students were really finding it difficult to be able to do that. They would just write down verbatim everything that you're saying, word for word. Here, we're really trying to get them think and separate those two ideas.
Yeah, that in itself is such an important skill, and I think such a good benefit of that 2-column note-taking method. So you can see from this progression from year 7 to year 8, already we're asking them to do a slightly more sophisticated process to actually break those ideas apart and setting them up for the more complex Cornell notes that are to come soon as well.
Yeah, exactly. And as well, we're providing them with the structure and the scaffolding, even though we've reduced it slightly from year 7. But the act of actually separating those main ideas from the detail actually strengthens the understanding and memory of the content the students are actually learning about.
Excellent. As we move into year 9, we start to introduce the Cornell note-taking. So research does support that this method is the most efficient note-taking method and also makes it easier to review and recall notes than potentially any of the other note-taking methods out there. And as you can see from the setup there, it is an extension of what students have been doing already in years 7 and 8. So you can see how it's broken up. We've still got those 2 columns, topic at the top, and then we introduce this little area down at the bottom. Now, what I find really great about Cornell Notes is it's not just about taking the notes, but it's about what you do with the notes. And we've broken it down into the 5 R's for students. So the first one's nice and simple. It's about knowing how to rule up your Cornell notes. You can see the system or the procedure over on the left-hand side there. Then we get into the good stuff. So the second R is to record their notes. So during class, just like they did in the 2-column method, students record as many meaningful facts and ideas as they can. And this should be in dot point form. So that goes in the right-hand column. As soon after as possible, they summarize these facts and ideas concisely in that left-hand column or the Q column. So cues, the idea of a cue is something to jog their memory or to help them remember the details that they've written on the other side in their notes area. So a cue can be a keyword, a question, a picture, anything that's going to help them to remember. After that, they do review their knowledge. So it involves students creating a summary of their notes. So in itself, again, another valuable strategy that we're introducing here to help embed and retain knowledge. And then you'll notice we've got all this covered in the extra notes you can see over on the right-hand side there. My right, your left, yeah, right-hand side there. And this page is actually provided for students in the extra notes section of every Stile X booklet. So I'll flip through and just show you there so that students can actually refer back to those steps every time they are being asked to create those Cornell notes. But the recite, our last R here, is probably my favourite, Elise. It's kind of like your old look, say, cover, write, check, and encourages students to actively use their notes to recall. Using that active recall, we touched on the 5 strategies that underpin Stile X in our last webinar. But for those of you that joined us for that, you'll be familiar with the idea of making students remember the knowledge without having it there in front of them. So it gets them to cover up their notes and just use those cues to help recall the knowledge that they are trying to remember. So I think that's one of the most exciting parts, because it's not just about writing the notes, it's about using them to help retain and not just memorize, but to embed that knowledge and really understand that knowledge.
Exactly, Jackie. There's so many times where your students have all these beautiful handwritten notes and beautifully highlighted, but they actually don't retain any of the information or have it there ready for them. So I kept, saying to students, these notes are meaningless unless you can actually recall the information from them.
Yeah,
so it's
absolutely.
so important having those cues to help with that active recall.
And that's what we're really trying to focus on in Stile X. It's not about getting the information down. It's not about memorizing the information. It's about embedding that knowledge. So in year 9 and 10, we do place an even greater emphasis on teaching students the micro skills that they need or that they require to take those great notes. So once again, we can't just assume that they're going to be able to go in and create great dot points or write a great summary. So throughout each unit, students are actually explicitly taught each of the micro skills in isolation, And then at the end of the unit, we get them to put those skills together in a full Cornell note-taking extravaganza. Extravaganza makes note-taking sound exciting, doesn't it?
It's so good.
So a little example here from our Year 9 immune system unit. So once again, this is what I've been showing off here. There's lots of other activities, but at 4 different points throughout the unit or throughout the booklet, there is an opportunity for students to practice those 4 micro skills in isolation. You can see the first one there, they've got an opportunity to practice outlining into dot points. And that note-taking tip, again, provides them that extra scaffolding about how to do that and how to write a great dot point note. The second one over on the other side, we've got creating cues. So we model throughout all the different ways that students can take cues, whether it be a keyword, a question, or a diagram, and give them lots of exposure to different ways that they can go about doing that. The next activity that we had was one around summarizing. And then in the final one, this is the last example here, this is our extravaganza. And that's where students are being asked to bring all of those skills together to create their own Cornell notes and then to practice them by reciting. You'll notice that our note-taking tip here also provides some guidance for students as to when to go back and recite, and holds them accountable by getting them to fill in the gap and just pop in the date that they did that. So you'll notice it says practice makes perfect. Try reciting your notes on the day. You make them the day after and at the end of the week. And then we've got a bit of a checklist there for them to track that progress. And that's, again, about that spaced repetition, one of those strategies that we touched on previously to help embed that knowledge. You'll notice that in this final example here, only a small amount of prompting is provided. So that scaffolding has been taken away because they have learned how to do those skills throughout the unit. All right.
All righty. So we also like to touch on some other expert study tips provided throughout Stile X and how these are actually scaffolded from year 7 to 10. So the expert study tips are really designed to help students develop good study practices and strategies. The tips cover a range of revision techniques, including planning for study, memorization, self-regulation, focus techniques, time management, so on and so forth.
But we also cover there, isn't there, Elise?
So much to cover. But another great thing is it's not just all academic tips. So we do have some tips where we're trying to support the student holistically. So we've got some mindfulness and mindset tips as well as motivation development, which is really, really wonderful.
Can I show off one of my favorites? Sorry, we didn't put it in the presentation. Yes. But we do have opportunities throughout Stile X for students to do some mindful colouring as well. And in the prototype that schools have been trialling this year, we weren't quite sure about whether we should or shouldn't include it. And the feedback has been overwhelming that students are really appreciating and enjoying that opportunity. And of course, there is a whole lot of research around the fact that mindful colouring is, a really important or a really valuable way to step back and reflect as well and take that time.
So the expert study tips in Stile X are really divided into 3 categories of increasing complexity. So we have the do, the plan, and the reflect. So the do study tips are the most simple tips which students can implement straight away. So an example that we have there is, being able to write your notes by hand. The plan study tips, they require students to think ahead to make most out of their future study sessions. So interleaving, the example that we have there, that's all about how do we make connections between the content that we're studying and that we're learning about, and students really planning ahead to have clear sort of blocks of study that they're doing. So rather than spending, an entire hour on a biology topic, they're going to break that hour up into 15-minute, 4 15-minute parts, and they might study some biology, they might move on to some chemistry, then some physics, so on and so forth. So they do require some planning for that strategy. And then the last one is reflect. So reflect study tip asks students to actively engage in metacognition. We want them to reflect on their mindset, their attitudes, their practices towards their study. We really want students to have agency over their learning rather than just passively working through the work that's provided to them. So that's sort of how we've scaffolded these tips. You will notice here that we've got the do, plan, reflect. This is a circular thing which is shown up in all of the booklets. So it doesn't mean that just year 7, they're only doing the do. They will be looking through, they will be doing do, plan, reflect through year 7, 8, 9, and 10. So what we're doing though is we're raising the complexity as we move through up until year 10. Some examples here of expert study tips. These two are around highlighting. So in itself, highlighting is not a very effective method for revision and study, but these tips really help to provide students with ways to make it more of an active process to learn how to do this as well. It's almost like drip feeding, with a tip in every lesson, as Jacky just mentioned. They're constantly being drip fed or exposed to ways to actually level up or supercharge their own study practices.
Now, these are some of my favorites. As we move into year 9 and 10, again, we start to try and think of the strategies that are more applicable or appropriate to students in those year levels. And that's often when they start taking their first exams or performing more under those test conditions. So we have in year 9 and 10 a whole range of different exam strategies for students. And once again, multiple exposures to these taught in the context of the content. So they're actually learning and actively able to apply these as they're doing it, as they're learning, and it will set them up with a repertoire of skills to draw on when in those exam situations. Once again, strategies that I wish that I'd had, and some of them at times seem so simple, but they're actually just things that unless we explicitly say them or explicitly teach them to our students, things that we take for granted, for example, like leaving a question if it's too difficult and coming back to it later. I've had students in those test situations that have been just blocked by a question and not moved on, and then work themselves up into a flurry because they're so stressed about that question. They sometimes just don't have those self-regulation strategies or those exam strategies to use to help them achieve success. And Stile X is designed to be that sort of low stakes, the opportunity to do that and to practice those skills. For those that aren't familiar with the sort of structure, they do have that opportunity to create their revision notes where they're practicing some of those note-taking skills we spoke about earlier. We've got our glossary, and then there is that practice test section at the end as well, so where they can start to apply some of those exam strategies, but not in an exam situation. So that's about all that we have time for today, Elise. We kept it short and sweet for you all today. But before we wrap up, I put this picture together. That's why it's not very pretty looking, but
very good.
But I was just trying to capture where this all fits in. And so obviously we know it's setting students up for success in senior science. They have to know the content. They need those science inquiry skills. We think it's so important that all that's taught in context. And that's where Style Classroom really comes in. And then, of course, we've got that key ingredient of the teachers. We've got high-impact teaching strategies being used. We've got teachers actively involving students in that learning process. And we see that's where Style Classroom sits, the Style Classroom that you all know and love. And then we feel like Stile X is a little bit like that missing piece. So the other thing that students need to know is basically how to learn and how to be lifelong learners. And so we think put that all together, and we're hoping that we're providing you with everything you absolutely need to give your students the best possible chance at that.